Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. We are glad that you are with us. We wish to welcome you to the daily Bible study for the Sealang Church of Christ. If you have been to our building, you know where we are. If, on the other hand, you are joining us from someplace else in the world or someplace else in the Philippines, we are located in the city of Silang, Cavite, Philippines, on Alganaldo Highway at kilometer 42. That makes us about 30 miles or 50 kilometers south of downtown Manila. We are glad that you are with us, and we hope that our study of God's Word is of benefit to you today. As we continue our study of the anchorage principle, today we're going to begin to deal with something called free moral agency and divine justice. You see, in this day-to-day life that we all live, every Christian at some point in their spiritual pilgrimage finds themselves struggling with the perceived unfairness of the world. We live in a physical and a spiritual environment that often feels like a theater of the absurd, where the righteous face staggering infirmities and difficulties, and the wicked seem to prosper without consequence. This tension naturally breeds doubt. When life becomes cruel, we find ourselves echoing the cries of Job, Job 21 and 7, Job 21 and 7, CJ.
Job chapter 21 and verse 7 reads, Why do the wicked live, reach old age, and grow mighty in power?
You see, we might ask the same question. Why does that wicked person have material possessions? Why does that wicked person not have health concerns? Why does that wicked person live to be so old? And why does that wicked person accumulate social power? We might wonder why the godly are afflicted, while those who mock the Almighty seem to have no bands in their death. The reason acts as a vital anchor in these moments of turbulence. It keeps our focus on faith that recognizes that God is not a distant, disinherited architect, as what are known as, never mind, we're going to brain fade on the word, who wound up the universe like a clock and walked away. On the contrary, the biblical truth reminds us that the God who is there, he chose, he is close by, he is intimately connected in the human experience. He is aware of every tear that is shed in private. Yet, even with this assurance of his presence, we find a profound theological crossroads. If God is present, if God is all powerful, and God is all loving, how do we reconcile his sovereignty with our personal suffering and the daily choices that we make? You will even be challenged by skeptics who will tell you that if God is all powerful and all loving, there should be no suffering, because that proves that number one, he's not all loving because either he doesn't care enough to fix the problem, or B, number two, he's not all powerful because he can't fix it. In order for us to navigate this doubt, we have to dive into the mechanics of human soul and to understand the complex ideas of foreknowledge and predestination. We must first master the biblical teachings that are surrounding free moral agency. Without this foundation, any attempt to understand God's nature will become distorted, and it will lead us to a theology that is not only confusing, but is potentially harmful as well. We must learn the subject well. Otherwise, we will end up building a concept of God that is distorted in how he deals with us both now and at the end of time. Free moral agency is not found verbatim in the pages of the Bible, much like the word Trinity is not there. However, the concept is the very bedrock of the scriptural narrative. From the first command in the Garden of Eden to the final invitation in the book of Revelation, the Bible operates on the assumption that individuals possess the mental, emotional, and spiritual ability to determine their own destinies. When we use this phrase, we are asserting that every person is a moral being with a conscience. That conscience is a faculty that comforts us when we do right and convicts us when we do wrong. Romans chapter 2 and verse 15. Rochelle, Romans chapter 2, verse 15, please.
Romans chapter 2, verse 17 reads,
15,
But if you
15.
call... Ay, 15. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them.
You see, our freedom in this agency refers to our God-given privilege to make decisions, those being either right or wrong. It is the total responsibility of each and every one of us to either obey or disobey. This is not a secondary characteristic of humanity. It is our primary operating system. Because we have this freedom, God stands as a just judge. If we were simply programmed entities, the day of judgment would
Nasaan
be...
mo kay ate, doon ka matulog kay Kuya Mark, dito ka na
Just a
matulog.
moment. Back to my point. Judgment Day is where we're going to be rewarded for either what we did or we did not do. If we did not have the freedom to choose good, this would be a hollow performance. But because we can make a choice to react in a negative manner to God's will, we are responsible for our actions in relation to an eternal God who will judge the world in a righteous manner. He has ordained this to be true. Acts chapter 17 and verse 31. Acts chapter 17, 31. Eileen.
Acts chapter 17 and verse 31 reads, Because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead.
Okay. If we don't have the power to choose, or if the power to choose is an illusion, then accountability is also illusion. For a man or woman to be free moral individual, There are four specific conditions that must exist, and they must exist at the same time. Even if one of these is missing, the concept of accountability changes or collapses. You see, number one, we must have the ability to choose. God did not make us robots. A robot is a product of programming. If it malfunctions, the fault lies entirely with the manufacturer or the programmer. Instead, we were created unprejudiced nature, given the genuine capacity to move toward the best or worst of our decisions. Solomon made a note of this. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 29. Abby, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 29.
Ecclesiastes 7:29 says, "This only have I found: God made mankind upright, but men have gone in search of many schemes."
God made man upright.
Upright.
Yes. Now, what happened to the total deprivation of mankind and original sin? God makes each of us upright. We get in trouble when we seek out our own schemes. So, what the implication here is that we are born with a moral innocence and an inherent power to do the will of God from that uprightness. But there's a second condition that must apply. Not only must we have the ability to choose, we must have an environment for choice. Freedom of will is useless without a world in which we can exercise that freedom of will. If God had placed us in a hedged environment where evil was impossible to select, we would not be free. We would be prisoners of that golden cage, if you will. Satan famously complained that God had put a hedge around Job, making it impossible for him to choose anything other than righteousness. Job chapter 1 and verse 10. Jonalyn, Job chapter 1 and verse 10.
Job chapter 1:10 says, "Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hand, and his possession have increased in the land."
Okay, and 11, please, Cora.
And 11, but now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face.
Okay, you see, what we see here is that the narrative of the book of Job proves Satan wrong. Job was in an environment where he
Pwede ka
could have
mag-data kasi ang data mo matagal pa.
rebelled.
Oo.
In
May
fact,
data ka pa.
Job chapter 2 and verse 9. Job chapter 2 and verse 9. Norval?
Job chapter 2, verse 9 says, "Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die."
I'm glad that I'm not married to that wife. Okay. But he could have chosen to curse God and die, and that is evident from what we see in the book of Job. So not only must we have an ability to choose, and not only must we have an environment for choice, we have to have the freedom to act. You see, ability and environment are nothing without the actual permission from God to act. God gives us freedom to react negatively to his laws without external forced control. Jesus wept over Jerusalem. Matthew 23:37. Matthew 23:37. Malu?
You 23:37. Am I right?
Yes, please.
Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing.
But you were not willing. Here we see the divine will meeting the human will. God absolutely desired their salvation, but he would not override their refusal to act in accordance with his desire. So, what do we see? We must have the ability to choose. We must have an environment that makes choice possible, and we must have the freedom to act. But there's something that's missing, and that is we must have the ability to be tempted. A free moral individual must have the emotional and spiritual capacity to be enticed. Without the ability to be tempted, we would not be true free moral agents. James explains, James chapter 1 and verse 14. James chapter 1, verse 14. Vanessa.
James 1:14 reads, "But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire."
When you are lured and drawn away, what? By your own desires.
Desire.
If God condemned someone who had not acted out of the ability to make these choices, that would make him an unjust judge. The very presence of temptation in the world is proof that we were designed to be tested and to choose a higher path. But there's a great theological debate: free agency versus predestinarianism. There is a popular theological notion that individuals are predestined, meaning that their eternal fate was decided before they were even born. However, the teachings of individual free moral responsibility and individual predestination stand in direct opposition to each other, and they cannot both be true. If individuals have been given the responsibility to respond, either positively or negatively, to God's will, then the notion that God has irreversibly destined individuals to either heaven or hell before they were born cannot be true. If God had already decided who is lost and who is saved, then the Great Commission, which commands us to preach the gospel to every creature, Mark chapter 16 and verse 15. Mark 16:15, Terrence.
So is it Mark 16:16?
Mark chapter 16, verse 15.
So Mark 16, verse 15 says,
Terrence, speak up, please.
hello, sir.
Your audio's dim.
Go into all the world and preach the gospel.
There you go. Come on.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Mark 16, verse 15 says, and he said to them, go into the older world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation.
Proclaim the gospel. When I speak to a Calvinist, I always ask the question, do you believe in evangelism? Do you believe in evangelism? The answer you always get back is yes. Why? If you tell me that some people were predestined to go to hell before they were born, preaching to them makes no difference. They're going to hell. And if you tell me that they're going to heaven regardless, preaching to them makes no difference. They're going to heaven. Predestinarianism makes evangelism entirely unnecessary. Because if they're predestined, evangelism is a futile exercise. Why preach to someone who cannot change their eternal destination? Why warn somebody who has already been selected for safety? The biblical view of predestination is not about picking individuals for salvation, regardless of their individual choices, but rather it's about God's predetermined plan for those who choose to be in Christ. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 4. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. Francine?
Ephesians chapter 1 verse 4 reads, even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him in love.
Who did he choose? He chose those who decided to respond to the gospel. Sorry about the sneezing, guys. And believe it or not, I'm at 42. Clarence, you're going to forgive me if I don't get to you?
Yes, sir. It's okay, sir.